What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so this is a video response to the brother Town Biz, right? Because he did a video last night. It was the last video I looked at before I went to bed, and he brought up an interesting question. And he brought up whether or not it was time for Robert Horry to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Okay, and Robert Horry is a very puzzling case at times because one person can bring a convincing argument that may just be enough to sway you to thinking, you know what, man, he is a Hall of Famer. But then another person can bring up an argument, and you're right back to square one, like, yeah, I don't think he's a Hall of Famer. This is my opinion, okay? I think that when you look at yesterday's inductees for this fall's or late summers, but I'll just say falls, September, induction class of 2021, right? And you see, they say Tony Kukoc, you see Chris Bosh, you see Chris Webber. I think people are subconsciously saying to themselves, well, there you got a guy who was always maligned, and I remember him being just a third stringer with the Miami Heat. I remember him fucking up and not getting a lot of rebounds, and you know, Chris Webber never won a title, and Kukoc was just a guy coming up the bench for Chicago, wasn't he? How are these guys in the Hall of Fame? Well, if you're gonna lower the bar like that, then well, shit, you might as well put in Robert Horry. But this is the thing, though. With Tony Kukoc, it's not his NBA career that's putting him in; it's the international career, and he had one of the greatest international careers that we've ever seen. Chris Webber is a Hall of Famer. We've been saying this for years on here. You have people that counter us, telling us he's not. We watched the man play. We know what a Hall of Famer is. He's a Hall of Famer. Okay. And as far as Chris Bosh is concerned, you have to remember something. Chris Bosh was the man in Toronto. He left that franchise, I believe, was the all-time leader at the time, at least, in points, rebounds, and block shots. His last season there, he averaged 24 and I think 10 or 11. And overall in his career, he was 11-time NBA All-Star. And this is a guy whose career was prematurely ended at age, 33, due to blood clots. So, yes, most definitely he's a Hall of Famer. Not to mention the two championships and the four NBA Finals appearances. And Chris Bosh, once he finally got acclimated to playing that role that he had to play for that to work, because Chris Bosh was the factor. People talk about how Wade had to alter his game for it to work, but Chris Bosh was also equally as important. And once he nailed that role, the Heatles were a formidable team. But let me get to Robert Horry. Robert Horry was a very good player. He won 7 championships, the most of any player outside of the Bill Russell Celtics dynasty of the late 50s and 60s. He won 2 championships with the Houston Rockets, back to back, 94, 95. He won 3 consecutive championships with the Shaq Kobe dynasty, 2000, 2001, 2002. And he won 2 championships in the mid 2000s with the Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker trio, 2005 and 2007. His last season was the 2007-2008 season. He played 16 years in the NBA. He came out of Alabama. Um, is he a Hall of Famer? I would have to say no. Number one, and a good friend of mine tells me this, and I agree with this. He told me this a lot of times. Shout out to LB. If you have to think about someone being a Hall of Famer, I mean, seriously think about it, then most likely they're not a Hall of Famer. Okay? There are some guys I can think about with 95% probability or certainty, and I can say that they're likely a Hall of Famer, or that they are a Hall of Famer. Um, when I see Robert Ory's resume, I don't see Hall of Fame. I see a guy that was a very good clutch performer. I see a guy that did step up his game in the playoffs consistently. Um, but even that, I think, is slightly overstated in our collective memories. Even that, I think, is slightly overstated because I do recall Horry, for instance, stinking it up one particular playoffs. You know, he just couldn't buy a shot. You know what I'm saying? And he contributed. I think it was his first year with the Spurs. He contributed to his team losing. He had a horrible shooting series, um, which was not consistent with him. You know, usually he did play well, but he didn't always come out there and shoot, the lights out. He had some bad shooting series. I think most people think of moments with Horry. They think of the 1995 NBA Finals where he arguably had his best stretch of games ever. I think he averaged something like 17 points and maybe 10 rebounds against Orlando Magic. People think of Game 4, 2002 Western Conference Finals between the Lakers and the Kings. I think some people think of that game. I can't remember which one it was, but I think it was the 2007 NBA Finals, or was it 2005? Can't remember exactly which one it was. But there's moments with Horry that we remember. We remember the clutch shots, the clutch, game winners, or shots that changed the momentum of the game. Don't get me wrong, he was a very good clutch performer, but there are a lot of other better players, in my opinion, who aren't in the Hall of Fame because of whatever reasons, injuries. Andrew Toney was probably the best clutch performer in the NBA in the early 80s, the early to mid 1980s. But he's not in the Hall of Fame because of foot injuries. Foot injuries robbed him of what should have been a Hall of Fame career. Now, how can I justify in my mind putting Robert Horry in the Hall of Fame, but not a guy like Andrew Toney? How could Robert Horry be in the Hall of Fame, but not a guy like, even better case, a guy like Sweet Lou Hudson? How could I put Robert Horry in the Hall of Fame, but a guy like, what's another guy that's not in the Hall of Fame? How could I put Robert Horry in the Hall of Fame, but not have, say, Antoine Jameson or Tom Chambers or Joe Johnson? You get me? Like, what what are we looking at? Are we really emphasizing championship rings? Because if you take away Robert Horry's rings, um, what are we looking at? It's almost like the Steve Kerr phenomenon. Now he was a better player than Steve Kerr, but Horry was never seriously an All Star or even like considered an All Star. Um, and when you look at the 16 years he played, 15 and a half of them were spent playing with guys like Elijah Wan and Otis Thorpe and Clyde Drexler, Shaq, Kobe, Tim Duncan, David Robinson, um, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker. 15 and a half of his 16 years, he played with players like that. You're going to win a lot of championships if you're playing with guys like that. He happened to play with Olajuwon in his prime, Shaq and Kobe in their primes, Tim Duncan in their primes, Ginobili, Parker. So he had the luckiest career, if you ask me. He had the luckiest career I've ever seen as far as what teams he signed up with. The half a season that he was on a bad team was in 96, 97, I think, when he briefly played with the Phoenix Suns, and he had really no impact on that team. When he didn't have talent around him, Horry disappeared. Now, it wasn't a long period of time, but on that particular team when he was there, he struggled. I would counter that it's another teammate of his that was a better player. That was Sam Cassell. Sam Cassell was a much better player to me than Robert Horry. But Sam Cassell will never be in the Hall of Fame because people just don't think he's a Hall of Famer. But if you put Horry in, how you don't put Sam Cassell in? And this is the slippery slope that we have to look at. You know what I'm saying? If Robert Horry had a stronger, let's say, let's say he had a Hall of Fame caliber career in Alabama. Let's say his collegiate career was one of the greatest. Then you can put him in because you can put him in for college because it's just not the NBA. But his collegiate career in Alabama was good, but not to that extent. Um, at the end of the day, I just can't in my mind justify putting him in the Hall of Fame. Um, no, I just don't see a guy that's a Hall of Famer. And if you go back in history, if that trade in 1994, I think it was February of 94, if that trade for him and Matt Bullard in exchange for Sean Elliott, because the Rockets tried to acquire Sean Elliott, if that trade goes through, in reality, if the trade was rescinded, it failed because Sean Elliott, during the physical, was found to have a kidney problem. But if that trade doesn't go through, if that trade does go through, excuse me, and Robert Horry is jettisoned to Detroit for several years, and he doesn't build up his reputation for being this great clutch performer, are we having this conversation? Probably not. Robert Horry probably would have gone the way of, maybe somebody like Rodney Rogers, maybe um, a really good player on some decent teams, a couple of bad teams, and that's about it. You know, I just don't see a Hall of Famer. I see a guy that made the most of the opportunities that were presented to him. I believe he was a hard worker. Um, I believe that there was a lot of luck involved in there as far as teams that he was able to go to. And he built up a reputation, to the point where um, great players want great role players. And he was a hot commodity in the NBA when it comes to that. But no, I just don't see a Hall of Fame. If there was a role player section in the Hall of Fame, yeah, put him in there. And I know some people feel like he should be honored for some reason. Like, you got to bring him some type of notoriety, some type of, you should be able to give him some type of praise or appraisal. And he is in the San Antonio. I believe I believe he's in the San Antonio Spurs Hall of Fame for their franchise. And I believe that the Lakers should do this. I think the Lakers should go ahead and move George Mikan, and they should move Vern Mickelson and Jim Pollard and put them. And I think they should retire their numbers. And then I think they should take guys like Horry and Derek Fisher, right? Those long tenured Lakers. They should take them and put them in the Ring of Honor. That's what I think they should do. Um, but who am I? I'm just some nigga that makes videos. But that's pretty much how I feel about Robert Ory, man. I think that I think he was a really good player. I do think he had some great moments. I do remember him having a couple of really great series. But when you look at the regular season, for the most part, um, there's not a lot there. There's too many single digit. When you look at the numbers, like this is a guy that, let's just check some out right quick. This is a guy that was 6'9" and 240, and he shot 42.5% from the floor, 34% from three, which was actually a little bit below average when it comes to 3-point percentage for his era, or about average. 73% from the line. He averaged about 7 points a game for his career. Um, his best years were with Houston. He averaged double-digit points in Houston, but afterward, Horry was a guy that usually gave you about 4 to 7 points a game. Um, you know, I just don't know. I just don't see a guy that's a Hall of Famer, man. And it's not just me looking at his numbers. It's me looking back in my mind at him as a player. And this is the thing. Horry had moments toward the end of games where he could be dominant. Okay, I give him that. He had moments where he could input his will on the game. Um, but Horry wasn't the type of guy that could dominate a game from start to finish consistently. He could never do that. Also, Horry was best when the main guys were getting the attention. You know what I'm saying? Horry was the guy that thrived being on the weak side of the floor and in a catch and shoot situation. Horry was the type of guy you could give the ball and say, "Hey, I need you to take us to the promised land tonight." Charles Barkley was a guy that could do that. You know what I'm saying? Michael Jordan, Kobe, Shaq, Dare Robinson, those were guys that could do that. Even Patrick Ewing, even though sometimes he didn't play as hard as he should have, or raise his game to a level that he should have. Or he couldn't do that. So I'm sorry, he's not a Hall of Famer to me. But tell me what you guys think, man. You know what I'm saying?